Ned and two classmates are in Yellowstone National Park for 3 weeks, studying an animal called the yellow-belly marmot. Ned plays on his college basketball team, but he must not be very good if coach is totally fine with him taking a month off of practice.
Argo Funk Book Review, Argo Funk Book Review.
When Nancy arrives at the campsite, she's mistaken for a thief. Two maintenance men called Richard and Piker violently grab her. It looks like they're gonna hurt her, so she fights them off with her karate moves. I hope that the real-life employees at Yellowstone don't attack strangers without provocation. Otherwise, there are probably a lot of injured tourists. Ned explains the mystery. Someone stole 50 marmots in order to sell them as $500 pets. For the study, they've been capturing marmots and fitting them with special transmitters. The transmitters can tell you the animal's location, temperature, blood pressure, eating habits, and sleep cycles. Wow! Why are the culprits stealing the marmots? It sounds like the transmitters are far more valuable. Brad Keeler was hurt in a coffee explosion shortly after he discovered the theft. Nancy quickly discovers the explosion was deliberate sabotage, not an accident. Makes sense to me. You'd have to be pretty bad at making coffee in order to accidentally blow yourself up. Professor Dan Trainey is in charge of the project. He doesn't want Nancy investigating, and he criticizes Ned for bringing visitors when they're so busy. Professor Trainer has a gorgeous daughter named Jennifer, who flirts with Ned. This starts the typical Nancy is jealous of another woman storyline that we've seen in so many other books from this series. Jennifer only appears once after she's introduced, so she makes for a pretty poor love rival. Ned's love interest in book 90 was a better rival. It's sad I don't have to go that far back to find another example of a Nancy-Ned love triangle. Park Ranger Jack Billings is also a flirt. He flirts with Nancy and Bess every time he sees them. This is also a love storyline that I thought was poorly done. Bess falls in love with Jack like she didn't break up with her longtime boyfriend in her last appearance. Bess is sad. Jack doesn't like her as much as she likes him. Nancy reluctantly confesses that Jack flirts with everyone, and Bess gives up on him. The last two suspects are a wealthy couple named the Turkowers. They have a magazine article about marmots. Nancy finds it suspicious that a tourist would have information about their vacation site, so she forces Bess to follow the Turkowers. The culprit knocks Ned unconscious in order to steal some supplies. Professor Trainey becomes the main suspect when his key is found under Ned. Ned is cold and angry when Nancy accuses his beloved professor. Nancy has to hold back tears when Ned leaves for the night without saying a word. Nancy drives on a steep mountain road where the culprit appears in a stolen car and tries to force her off a cliff. The exact same thing happened in the last book. When will Nancy learn to stop driving near cliffs? The Turkowers know the name of Ned's college without being told, which is so suspicious Nancy searches their room. She finds a secret envelope which lists how much different animals cost on the black market. That's even more suspicious, but Nancy doesn't bother to investigate them any further. Nancy learns the project has put Professor Trainey into serious debt. Ned throws a temper tantrum over this. "How could you suspect one of my friends, Nancy? You're so mean! I wish you would go home and leave me alone!" Professor Trainey and Mr. Turkower are nearby when somebody pushes Nancy over a railing. She falls into a river and almost dies in the raging current. Nancy says the person who pushed her must be a man because his hands were big and hairy. That should make the mystery easy to solve. The culprit is the guy whose hands are so hairy they can be felt through a layer of clothing. I bet it's Bigfoot. Ned apologizes for what he said earlier. He and Nancy kiss and make up. They overhear Professor Trainey making plans to meet Mr. Turkower in secret. Again, this is something suspicious that Nancy should follow up on, but she doesn't. Out of nowhere, Nancy and Ned meet a famous musician named Randy Dean. They help Randy when his car runs out of gas. As a reward, he offers to let them watch when he films a nature documentary. I guess it's cool Nancy got to meet a celebrity, but what was the point of that chapter? The culprit leaves a threatening note on Nancy's car. This is a good example of why threatening notes usually show up at the start of the book and not the end. It's not intimidating for Nancy to get a mild threat in comparison to the 2 murder attempts that have already happened. Nancy spends 2 chapters investigating Richard and Piker. She goes so far as to travel to another state to visit their hometown sheriff and high school principal. She learns the 2 men are career criminals who lied to get jobs at Yellowstone. Late that night, Nancy sees a truck in the woods. She follows it to find the culprits stealing marmots. Lucky thing the culprits drove past her on their way to commit a crime. That made it super easy to solve this mystery. The culprits are Richard and Piker, who take orders from Ranger Jack. He's already kidnapped Professor Trainee. Jack ties both of them up and puts them in a geyser runoff fissure. Bad news, they will die when the fissure fills with boiling water. Good news, all the readers learn educational information about how geysers work. Nancy breaks the ropes on her hands. She climbs out of the fissure, then unties the rope on her feet. That's a choice. Why did she leave her feet tied before climbing out of the fissure? Wouldn't it have made way more sense to untie her feet first? Nancy saves the professor. She and Ned beat up the culprits before they escape with the marmots. The Turcoers reveal they were secretly federal agents all along. They give Nancy a $5,000 reward for catching the poachers. She doesn't keep the money. She donates it to Professor Trainee so he can continue the project. I hope Ned is going to get an A for the project after this. The end. Post-book follow-up. I didn't like this book. I found it to be fairly boring, with stories recycled from other books. It felt like the author was just going through the motions and they didn't really care about the story. I disliked how Nancy ignored the black market pricing list and the culprit's hairy hands. I don't know why she didn't follow up on those clues. Again, it felt like the author didn't really care and they were just following a formula. Like, Chapter 6, Nancy finds evidence. Chapter 7, culprit tries to kill Nancy. Chapter 8, love drama. Repeat those 3 chapters until the book is done. I thought it was a culprit giveaway when Nancy spent so much time focusing on Richard and Piker. They are 2 minor characters who talked once, and Nancy spends 2 chapters learning their entire life stories. There's no way the author would have done that if there wasn't going to be a payoff. Overall, I would recommend skipping this book. I couldn't bring myself to care about the characters or what was going on. I don't know if the romance drama or the mystery was worse, but they both could use a rewrite. I give Nancy Drew Files number 95, An Instinct for Trouble, a 1 out of 10.